Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Village Board for Monday, November the 15th, 2021. With Skokie and the entire state of Illinois now in Phase 5 of the Restore Illinois Plan and the lifting of restrictions on in-person gatherings, Skokie Village Board meetings are in person in council chambers at Village Hall, 5127 Oakton. Village Board meetings begin at 8 p.m. and will continue to be broadcast live on the Village's YouTube channel, as well as on Skokie Vision cable television channels 17, which is Comcast, and Channel 25, which is RCN. Meetings are also rebroadcast on the cable channels in the weeks following each meeting, and the videos are archived on the Village's YouTube channel. As of August 30th, 2021, all individuals in Illinois shall be required to wear masks when indoors, including village buildings. Public comments may still be submitted to publiccomments@skokie.org. Comments received prior to the meeting or during the meeting will be provided to the Village Board, but will not be read aloud. Public comments also can be mailed or hand-delivered to Skokie Village Hall, 5127 Oakton. Attention, Village Manager's Office, or they may be placed in the exterior drop box on the west side of Village Hall. Each Village Board meeting agenda includes time for public comments, and individuals wishing to speak on an issue will be allocated 3 minutes to address the Village Board. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our Village Clerk, Pramod Shah, who will lead us in this evening's Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The meeting will come to order, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Trustee Sutker,
Here.
Trustee Robinson,
Here.
Trustee Kuhn,
Here.
Trustee Johnson,
Here.
Trustee Pure Slovin,
Here.
Trustee Klein,
Here.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Here we have a quorum. The next item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda for this evening's meeting. A motion to approve the consent agenda is in order. Trustee Sutker, Trustee Johnson. Is there anything on the consent agenda anybody would like to have removed? If not, call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
Trustee Robinson,
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn,
Aye.
Trustee Johnson,
Aye.
Trustee Pure Slovin,
Aye.
Trustee Klein,
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes. The next item on our agenda is report of our village manager, John Lockerbie.
Thank you, Mayor Van Dusen and village trustees. Good evening, everyone. Item A is regarding our 2021 tax levy ordinance and tax levy abatement. The Village of Skokie's 2021 tax levy request is $15.4 million and represents the 31st consecutive year that the Village Board has adopted a levy that is equal to the Village's 1990 tax levy. Our Finance Director, Julian Prindy, will be providing a presentation regarding the tax levy this evening.
Thank you, John. Good evening, Mayor and trustees. Thanks for the opportunity to go over our tax levy and what this means for the village's finances and our property owners. I will try and move this very quickly, but please wave me down and ask any questions throughout the presentations, if you will. The highlights of the presentation, as John mentioned, the village's tax levy presented tonight is $15,456,695. In 1991, the village board adopted a property tax freeze based on the 1990 tax levy, and then the freeze was maintained and extended every year thereafter. Staff and the board collaboratively work together to figure out other financing means for village's operations through the years. And we were proud to present to you frozen levies through the years. And the 2021 tax levy is, again, no different than 2020 and the prior 31 years, frozen at $15,456,695. Just a brief note for members of the audience who are not familiar as to how property taxes make it from decision-making to the actual tax bills. Around budget time, every municipality and special taxing district adopts a budget, which includes financing through property taxes. Through this time, in December or prior to December, corporate authorities adopt a specific levy, which we're doing tonight at 15.4 for the village. The levy is communicated to the county. The county then spreads the levy request through the district's tax base, which is also known as the equalized assessed valuation. Each property owner then pays a allocated share. Payments are made directly to the county treasurer, and on a predetermined schedule, the county treasurer distributes those payments to taxing entities like the village. As John mentioned, this is the 31st year of the same freeze and the same process. I mentioned in the prior slide taxable property and equalized assessed valuation. That's essentially the value of all property in town. That's the base of the property taxes on what they are applied. The value of taxable property through time has increased, even though the village's levy has remained flat. Going back to 1990, the EAV, or the equalized assessed valuation in the village, was approximately $1 billion. For the 2020 year, the most recent available full year of levy, the EAV had increased to $2.8 billion, a 168% increase. A good indicator of the property values in the community, and also about the time value of money. A lot of time has passed since 1990, obviously. In 2020, you can see that the distribution of EAV, the taxable property, is split. The majority of it coming from residential and commercial. Residential just about 49% and commercial just about 41%. And industrial makes up the large part of the difference. You have a couple of small categories there in nonprofit and vacant land. Again, this touches only on the value of taxable property, and it does not include properties in town like the villages, park district, library, et cetera, that are not taxable, that do not show up on any property tax bill. For more backup and informational point, the property counts in town are about 3,800 commercial, 477 industrial, 21,860 give or take residential, and as of the most recent year, about 188 vacant lots. Just a quick note on inflation. I mentioned that since 1990, the value of money has changed. What a dollar would buy in 1990, certainly not the same that it would buy today. Annually, the buying power of currency decreases, and had the village adjusted its levy throughout the years just to keep up with inflation, today we'd be presenting a levy that was $27,494,000 and change, which would be a whopping $12 million higher than the $15.5 million presented tonight. On a per household basis, that would translate to about $268 additionally per year per household. And just another way to present the information in the prior slide, the green area in this graph represents the frozen levy through the years. The red would be the additional levy that would have been adjusted for inflation, culminating in that top right $27 million inflated levy. So as you're well aware, the village is not the only one that levies property taxes for operation and capital and debt and so on. There are many entities that have the legal ability to tax real property. And throughout the years, the share of each of those entities has shifted. The village, having maintained a frozen levy throughout throughout the years, obviously has seen a significant decrease in the share of a property tax bill from 1990. You can see 16% at the time, down to 6.24%. And I should note, this is based on the 2020 tax levy because that's the most recent year that we have data for. 2021 is just being established, if you will. The largest chunk of the property tax bill obviously goes to the schools. It was 55% in, just about 55% in 1990, and has gone up to 65% this year. I should note that school districts are very limited in the way they raise revenue. Property taxes and state funding are the only two essential means of revenue increases for them, whereas the village as a home rule community has many more taxing abilities and taxing powers. But this is just informational to show what a frozen property tax levy actually translates into the share of the property tax bill paid by our residents. Just a quick note on how we use the property taxes that we levy. The $15.5 million is predominantly going to public services right now, and that means fire, police, public works, general services, at a total of $8.4 million. The second largest share is pension funding. That includes our public safety pensions as well as our Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. And that particular share has been increasing recently as the village has dedicated more stable sources of revenue towards funding pensions, which has become a priority. And then only about 11% of the total amount, only about just shy of $600,000 goes to fund outstanding debt. I'll cover a little more of debt in the next slide. So as of May 1 of 2021, this current year, fiscal 22, the village has approximately $48.9 million in outstanding bonds, of which $16.7 million is specifically dedicated to the public library for their most recent renovation, and that is repayable through a property tax levy specifically by the library for their purposes. However, the $48.9 million in debt, it appears on the village's financials. It is technically our debt. That amount, those outstanding bonds require a payment of about $5.3 million just for fiscal 22, and that's inclusive of principal and interest. You can see that the village funds general obligation debt and debt service primarily through other sources. $2.5 million comes from TIF increment. 3 of the 4 outstanding debt ordinances currently in place are for TIF-related capital improvements. So that's why the largest portion of the debt service comes from TIF. About $1 million of it is comes from telecom taxes, and some of you may remember that when the village built the new police facility, we dedicated half of the telecom tax to fund specifically the debt service on the police facility, which is that just over $1 million. About $1,198,000 comes from the library. That's a transfer that occurs every year. They pay for that their share of the debt, so that's an amount the village does not have to fund. And that leaves about $600,000 that's funded through property taxes. I'll just spend a couple of minutes here on the Skokie Public Library. The village is required by statutes to adopt a levy for the public library, even though they determine the amount they need through their operational and budget process. This falls on the village board to approve. As a separately elected board for the library levy appears as a separate line item in property tax bills. The operational need for fiscal 22 currently for the library is about $12.3 million, $12,275,936. Including the amount which they transfer to the village to pay the bonds. The total levy for the public library for tax year 21 is $13,474,986, which has remained flat for 2021, and that is the 4th consecutive frozen levy on the library's part with no change. You are seeing today 2 ordinances. One of them is the tax levy and the second is the tax abatement. Typically we do these differently, but we figured we tackle them at once since they're kind of connected. As I mentioned, the village has 4 outstanding debt ordinances filed with the county, and each of these ordinances prescribe a certain amount to be levied in order to repay principal and interest for those specific bonds. The amounts that are prescribed by the ordinances are in the first column of numbers there under amount levied. Each of those amounts would otherwise be levied by the county if the village did not take any action today to abate or to forego a portion of this amount. So the amount we are recommending the village forego is in the second column under amount abated. And again, the reason why we're doing this is because the village has maintained a frozen tax levy, and we have already committed to using $600,000 of the frozen $15.5 million levy towards these bonds. The rest of this funding comes from the other sources I had mentioned. So that requires that the village abate about $3.5 million of the property taxes that would be required under these ordinances. Both of these ordinances are up for your review under first reading tonight, and will be presented at the first meeting in December for adoption.
So both the levy ordinance and the abatement
That's correct. Those are just up for first reading tonight.
tonight, and they will come up December 6th.
Correct.
Are
And
there
that's all I
any-
had. I'd open it up for questions if there are any.
Are there any comments or questions? A little dizzying sometimes.
I have a question. I think we touched upon this briefly during the budget hearing as well. In terms of the advantages and disadvantages of property tax increase versus fee for services, can you talk a little bit in terms of some of the advantages and disadvantages of that?
Certainly, I can speak from the perspective of the municipal authorities who are sort of required to fund the services, and from the rating agencies who look at our debt and give us opinions on where our creditworthiness rests. I'll tell you, a property tax as a funding source is the most reliable from the municipal side that you could get. The rating agencies like Moody's and Fitch and S&P look upon the ability to raise property tax in a home rule community, for example, like the village, that has a lot of value. The ability to raise property taxes, the ability to fund operations, capital, pensions, and debt, and so on through property tax, that's invaluable. The village has maintained the policy of freezing the property tax and essentially shifting the burden for our costs as much on outsiders, as much on visitors who come in and use our streets, our restaurants, and our amenities as possible. So not so much a fee for service, but more on the soft taxes, soft fees approach. And it has worked great for as long as the economy continues to improve and people go shopping and people spend at restaurants. That is an excellent way to fund services. In times of economic difficulty, those fee-for-service models or these soft taxes do tend to suffer first, whereas the property tax would be a lot more stable. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and then there would be more, the burden would be more on the taxpayers than at that time.
That's correct, yes. Some fee-for-services, like the refuse fee, for example, it makes sense. It's easy to compute cost. We know how much it costs per household thereabout, and we can easily compute that. It's a little harder to do that on a vehicle resurfacing type scenario where you don't know who's driving and what the wear and tear that's being put on the streets, how to pass that on to the users. But yeah, generally speaking, a reliable, equally shared revenue source is much more preferable, at least on this side. I understand as a taxpayer on the other side, it's burdensome regardless of whatever way you choose to fund it.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. So December 6th, we'll see you back here.
Yes, sir.
Item B is regarding a recommendation to issue pension obligation bonds. The village is committed to appropriately funding public safety pensions in accordance with both the legal deadline by 2040 as well as best practice actuarial methodology. The funding in fiscal year 2011 to the fire and police pension was $4.7 million. By contrast, for fiscal year 2022, the current fiscal year, the required annual funding has increased to 11.4 million. This is a 243% increase from fiscal year 2011 to fiscal year 2022. This annual funding is made up of two components: the additional benefits earned by active employees and the amortization of the unfunded portion of the total pension liability. As of May of 2021, the combined unfunded liability for both funds is 136 million. Because the village is in essence charged 6.75% on the $136 million of unfunded liability, the debt, the total of payments through 2040 grows to $348.5 million. Pension obligation bonds offer a way to refinance the unfunded pension liability, allowing the village to reduce the rate from 6.75% down to below 3%. Pursuing this option, the village would achieve a significant $73.7 million in savings by 2040. In addition, the annual pension funding requirement would stabilize between $13.1 million and $13.9 million throughout the entire throughout the entire 20-year repayment period. It is recommended the village issue pension obligation bonds of approximately $150.5 million to immediately fund both fire and police pension funds, unfunded liability at the 90% target mandated by the state, and to include a stabilization fund of approximately $14 million as a safety measure against any possible future negative events. Tonight, this item is for consideration and approval in concept. With approval, we will bring the bond ordinance for first reading at a future meeting. Julian Prendy, our Director of Finance, has been the lead on this analysis. I concur with staff's recommendation to issue the pension obligation bonds and respectfully request mayor and board approval.
Okay, and before you start, Julian, I would like to note that Dan Ryan and Richie Vonitz are with us this evening. Both are members of the Police Pension Board. So welcome. Good to have the two of you with us. Julian?
So I don't necessarily have a presentation prepared for this. I was going to open it up to questions. I'll just give you a couple of brief highlights as to what we're trying to accomplish through the pension obligation bonds. As the board will recall, this issue was brought up during the budget hearings where we presented the idea, and then at the time, we agreed that we would await the results of the 2021 actuarial study that was recently completed in late September, early October. That's where we actually received the 136 million final unfunded liability figure. The point, as John stated, the point is to reduce the cost of interest on the unfunded liability portion. Right now, annually, whatever we have in unfunded liabilities, the village is essentially charged 6 3/4%. And that's done because when the liability is calculated, that's based on the future value of these benefits. That amount is then discounted to present value using that 6 3/4% rate. So each year we're required to increase that value by 6 3/4% to charge ourselves interest, essentially. By funding a large chunk of the unfunded liability today through pension obligation bonds, which we can secure at historically low rates. I think in the memo you were presented with 2.86%. As of today, I have a new analysis that shows them at about 2.81%. We can actually place this money in responsible investments consistent with the abilities that each police and fire pension boards have to invest these funds and capture additional market returns to allow the village to attain that 90% funding within 1 or 2 years and then maintain that funding through the 2040 deadline imposed by the state. Just a few bullet points here. We're targeting the 90% mandated by the state by 2040. We're projecting a 6.75% return on investment and a 2.8% all-inclusive interest rate on the bonds. The average annual return, we've been tracking annual market returns on both of these funds, and the average for the past almost 40 years has been about 8.43 for fire and 8.57% for police. We would establish a 14 million stabilization fund. This would be held aside for those years where the markets don't return 6 3/4, or the state boosts benefit levels for police and policemen, firefighters by, for whatever reason, and the unfunded liability would increase, or any other potential negative event that would change that unfunded liability. We would hold these funds in escrow at the village level. These are not transferred to the pension funds. These are controlled by the village. And we would use them on an as-needed basis to stabilize the funding level for both police and fire pensions. Issuing the pension obligation bonds would also allow the village to stabilize our cash flow and required payments towards the pension funds. About 9.6 million of that 13.6 million mentioned here would be debt service on the bonds. That's relatively fixed throughout the 20 years. On top of that, we would pay about $4 million to each pension fund and to both pension funds, about $2.5 million to each, which would be benefits earned each year. So each year new benefits are earned. Some contribution will always be required into the pension funds. But by combining those two funding numbers, we come up with about 13.6, anywhere from 13.1 to 13.9, that window throughout the 20-year repayment schedule for the bonds. Now, we're projecting, the memo had a slightly lower figures than these. The analysis I just received today shows about 75 million in future value, discounted in present value to 47.3 million, which is 17.4% of the total debt we would have paid, the amortization of the liability we would have paid had we not, if we do not go down the POB path. Those are the points that I was hoping to cover. If there's any questions on this, I'm be open to answer.
Julia, what in essence we're doing is legal arbitrage.
That's correct.
Well, there is a federal statute that does not permit units of government, because of the tax advantages we get through issuing bonds, from doing arbitrage, correct?
That is correct, yes.
But there's a carve-out for pension bonds.
There's a carve-out for any taxable bond, and these would be taxable bonds. The interest earned would be taxable to those bondholders.
So what we're in essence doing is borrowing money to invest money
Correct.
and taking the fruits of the wise investment
I'm smiling at you.
and paying, well, no, well, because I think for somebody who is uninitiated, it gets a little confusing because thankfully, the state legislature passed legislation a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, Dan, which combines the 650 separate police and fire pension funds into one pension program statewide, which is then divided into one fire, one police pension board. And they will operate like the Illinois municipal pension and bill us each year a certain amount. And we estimate that'll come to a combined total of 13.1 to 13.7 million.
Just for clarity, the 13.6 is a combination on what we would have to pay on the bonds and
Right.
what we would have to pay to the pensions. So the amount we'd have to pay the pensions would be in the 5 million range annually.
Okay.
Because we would be achieving essentially 90% funding the moment we would be issuing these bonds. We would be sending 136 million, allocated between fire and police to prudently invest, based on the limits that the state legislature has put on the investment authority of both boards. And that point would be 90%, which means the annual funding requirement from each fund would decrease to about 2.5 million.
but we, like with the Illinois Municipal Fund, we're billed annually.
We will be, I believe we will be allowed to run our own actuarials, at least initially, to determine the amount that we would need to fund the pensions. But as I said, so if you look at an actuarial report currently today, you will see an unfunded, total liability, an actuarial value of assets, and then an unfunded liability. And then the actuary tells you, okay, a portion of your payment annually has to go towards the benefits earned, and a portion has to go pay the interest on this unfunded liability. We're reducing that unfunded liability, we're reducing the interest paid on that, thereby leaving the majority of our annual funding to be just the new benefits earned. So I don't know if that's for a fact, and I don't know that we've been told from the consolidated funds as to whether they'll just send us a bill, as to whether they'll run an actuarial report and tell us exactly what we need to put in, or if they'll allow us to run our own, as we've done to date, and determine the level of funding, which the village would maintain as is.
That's part of the problem. They haven't determined.
They have not.
They're still talking,
That's correct.
and trying to determine that.
But Mayor, everything you've pointed out goes to the the primary foundation of what it's about, which is an attempt to bring stability to the pension
Right.
program for our first responders and others. And that's why there is, as you've pointed out, this kind of latitude and attention being taken to it.
Nobody has gotten too dizzy, I hope, from some of this. It gets a little complicated.
That is why I'm no longer talking, I'm just waiting for questions.
So this evening, what you would like is a consensus of the board for you to proceed to an ordinance which would permit the issuance of the bonds.
That's correct.
And that will be
Conceptual approval.
at a future date.
We anticipate sometime late December for first reading, although the schedule may change, but as of now, we're hoping to bring that in December with a potential sale date for the bonds sometime mid-January, and a funding date, a closing date of about first week in February.
And when would you bring bond counsel to the board, do you anticipate?
We would bring bond counsel at the time that the ordinance is presented. They would help us draft that, as you've seen in the past, it would be a parameters ordinance. It would establish sort of basic guidelines as to what we would look for when we go out to sell these bonds, and set some targets that we would not exceed on the interest rate, on the term, on when we can refund, the general parameters that you would expect in a bond ordinance. And, we will, the advisor, through the help of the attorney and us, we would go out, look for these bonds and meet those criteria. And eventually, the board will see a final version of the ordinance when the sale of the bonds happens.
And you would expect the interest rate to be 3.25%?
As of today, the projection is for 2.81 all-inclusive interest cost,
As of today?
as of today. We don't anticipate the rates to fluctuate significantly, the inflation being one part of the story. We understand that the Fed has committed to maintaining rates steady, which impact, obviously, the bond rates a little more heavily. So through our advisor, we're running with the assumption that rates won't change significantly through
Well,
January,
I
February.
saw 2 days ago, was it, last Friday, the 29 or 30-year mortgage interest rate went down from 2.8 to 2.1 or something, if I remember correctly. Is that?
I don't know for a fact. It's possible. It would explain this dip we got today from numbers we ran last week. I should note, because these are taxable bonds, there is a slight premium increase when you do issue taxable as opposed to tax exempt, but it's not significant.
Excuse my question. I actually find this stuff interesting. No other comments or questions? So I assume we have a consensus. I think we have a consensus. Does anybody object? If not, I think you can take that as a consensus to proceed.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
The next item is regarding the co-responder program status. The co-responder program consists of a partnership between Skokie's police and the fire departments, as well as the health and human services departments. Trustee Edie Sue Sudker initiated this program during 2020 and actively participated in our research and planning. In addition to Trustee Sudker, the leadership committee included Mike Charlie at the podium, our Director of Health and Human Services, our Fire Chief Jeff Hoflick, the Police Chief Brian Baker, and myself. And this evening, Mike Charlie is going to take the lead on the presentation and provide an update.
So good evening, Mayor and Board of Trustees. Mike Charlie, the Director of Health and Human Services for the Village of Skokie. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this, what I think is a really wonderful program. So let's just first talk about what is a co-responder program. Well, it's a partnership between Skokie's police, fire, and health and human services departments. The program pairs a crisis intervention team, and I use CIT moving forward, a trained officer and an experienced social worker to respond to behavioral health related crisis calls. And I did want to note that phase 2 of Skokie's co-responder program did start on November 1st, 2021. A little bit about the timeline. So as best as I can tell, actually in the spring of 2020, Trustee Edie Sudker approached the mayor and said, hey, you know, there's a really good program out there that are being run by other municipalities and government agencies, and it's called the co-responder program. And she recommended that the mayor and John Lockerbie take a look into it and determine whether or not it would be a good fit for the village of Skokie. Well, in the fall of 2020, when I arrived, we convened. It was myself, John, Trustee Sudker, Jeff Hoflich, the fire chief, and Brian Baker, the chief of police. And we did a little bit of research. We looked at the programs from Eugene, Oregon. We looked at the programs from Denver, Colorado. We had conversations with those agencies and asked them questions and did our research. And then we determined in May of 2021 we were going to conduct a pilot program where we, and I'll talk a little bit more about the pilot program in a second. But the pilot program, needless to say, we thought it was very successful, and it worked out well, and it was a good fit for the village of Skokie. So from June through November, we did more research. We had meetings with, I remember, a couple individuals from Denver, Colorado, collected more information in order to start our own phase 2 of the program November 1st, where we moved a social worker from human services into the social worker co-responder position. And the police department interviewed and hired a CIT trained officer to be a co-responder CIT trained officer. So I want to talk a little bit about the program objectives. This list is kind of long, so I'm going to skim through it pretty quick. But we certainly want to increase the percentage of calls being responded to directly by this co-responder team. So instead of a police officer, a CIT trained police officer arriving on scene, it's very likely now when they're on duty that they're the first ones on scene. We want to de-escalate the mental health situations, provide immediate care and advocacy support, refer a link to services, which is really important. You know, getting those individuals to those agencies that can provide therapy and support. Reducing recidivism, reducing police force response, providing follow-up and ongoing case management. Diverting individuals from the criminal justice system, diverting individuals from being hospitalized, improving interactions between police officers and the community, and improving information sharing and cross-training between the co-responder team now and the rest of our CIT and the rest of our police officers and social workers. So really quickly, let me tell you about the pilot program. So this was May of 2021. We had a process where we received phone calls or 911 calls into the dispatch center. And between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. 7 days a week that month, the CIT trained officer, when they arrived on scene, if they determined that it would be helpful to have a social worker on scene. They would call one of our 3 existing social workers, 2 in Human Services and then Julie Kim out of the police department on scene to assist with the situation. In the month of May, there were actually 136 total calls that were identified as being situations where there was some sort of mental health crisis. Of the 136 calls, 52 were outside of the times which we had the social workers available. And we actually ended up responding to 20 total calls. And I have some information on the next slide, but I feel it's kind of the right time to mention this, that the primary reason why the co-responder or the social worker responded to 20 calls rather than 84 calls is really, it's about timing, because the social worker at the time just wasn't, couldn't have responded in time to provide the services on scene. So the CIT trained officers that made a conscious decision in the best interest of the individual to follow up and not call out the social workers. So out of the 20 calls, 12 referrals were made successfully and services linked. 5 individuals were transported to the hospital, and then 5 individuals had repeated contact during the pilot program. So what did we learn? So we learned that social worker response time is really important. You know, the CIT trained officers that responded on scene said, hey, I can't wait 45 minutes for somebody to show up, because by the time they show up, it could escalate into something that it shouldn't be. Social workers provide at the time of crisis certain benefits, including we feel like they're much more likely to link individuals to service. This initial contact puts the social worker and the CIT trained police officer in close contact with this individual, where they get to know the name, they get to know the face, they can start to establish this relationship which they can use longer term. Also, based upon our experience and also our research, is that individuals are much more likely to take the next steps when approached by the co-responder team. We did start phase 2 November 1st. We do have one of our existing social workers transferred over into the co-responder social worker position, and we hired an existing police officer. They do work the same shift. It's from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. But of course, this is subject to change, and we'll make that determination after we observe the program for a while. They do work out of an unmarked police car, wear plain clothes, and to try to not stand out as much as maybe a uniformed police officer. The way it works is that from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., when there is a dispatch for a call and they identify it as one of these calls that includes mental health crisis, they'll respond, and they'll be the first ones on scene, and they'll manage the situation. Of course, if it's dangerous or they feel like it needs support from other police officers, they will follow up. During the hours when they're not working, what will occur is that a CIT trained police officer, we're very lucky, and I don't know what percent it is exactly, but it's a significant percentage of the police officers have this really unique training through the state, where they'll follow up, they'll triage the situation, and then the next business day, if necessary, they'll provide the police report and information to the co-responder team for follow-up with that individual. Of course, the goal of all of this is to reduce recidivism. You know, when the co-responder team isn't actually on the street following up to something via like a 911 call, we have identified a handful of individuals which quite honestly use a little bit more of our resources and we see more often, and what we're trying to do is spend time with those individuals to understand what their needs are. We'd like to divert them away from the 911 calls more to a social service, referral, assistance approach. We will be collecting data, and we will use that data to make informed decisions. These are some of the type of calls that we will be following up to: mental illness, well-being checks, domestic violence, suicide threats, sexual abuse, youth and family issues, death notifications, hazardous homes, which is like hoarding homes, homeless individuals, substance abuse, and elderly issues. Some of the outcomes, ultimately, we want to link these individuals to service. We are service-rich in Skokie, and the good news is that our social workers have a very good relationship with all of our social service agencies, and they're very familiar with what valuable services that these people can be referred to. We will provide support and resources to family members and others on scene. We will transport if we need to, and it does happen. Longer-term case management will occur when necessary. And I will say that the unique relationship we have here in Skokie is that we have police officers, we have the co-responder social worker, but we also have other social workers in the village that will provide support to this program. What are some of the potential resources, and support services? So not only mental behavioral health support, but we will help people find housing. So like the homeless, we work with Connections for the Homeless. Medical care, food. We work really closely with the Niles Township Food Pantry. We will help them with transportation, family parenting support, substance abuse support and referrals, and also shelter is something that we do on a day in and day out basis. We will be collecting information. During the pilot, we used a crisis intervention screening form, which collected all sorts of information, including demographics and whether we linked them to services and what we initially observed on scene. Also, the police department has their CAD system, which is their 911 system, and their RMS system, which is like their report writing system, which is a little bit more robust. And we will be collecting data to like I said, to determine how well the program is working. Community agency partnerships. This is really important. So we have partnerships with all the agencies you guys see here. We're on a first name basis with the administrators, with the therapists, and we'll use those as a tool to ensure that Skokie residents get the best service they can potentially get for themselves. What's the future? Well, only time will tell, but so far I will say that I'm really happy that Trustee Sutker brought it to our attention because I think it's an excellent program. Over the first 2 weeks, we've had about 25, 26 calls per week that they've responded to. Plus they've also done some follow-ups and other things. If it's successful, we may expand it, but only time will tell, what we end up doing with the program. So with that said, I can certainly answer any questions.
Comments or questions? Oh, I'm sorry, Keith. Oh, God, I did it.
I was just
again.
gonna ask.
I'm sorry, Keith.
That's all right. I was gonna ask, what was the biggest lesson learned so far?
Well, I think the biggest lesson learned is that two things. The first thing is that getting into contact with these individuals right away sets up this relationship between it's sort of like a coordinated approach to mental behavioral health response. And I think it's just like setting that initial foundation for success, right? Another lesson learned, which I think is sort of this underlying benefit, is I think that having a social worker work directly with those police officers on scene is really going to help out not only the co-responder team response, but I think the response from the remaining CIT trained police officers and police staff. So.
Thank you. First of all, I think it's fantastic. I'm very proud that this village has done it, and thank you, Edie, for bringing it to us. Have we done an analysis of when the calls come in more frequently? Are there specific hours of the day? Would you suggest that the program is needed more at night, and we should be looking at it that way?
Yeah.
Innocently and ignorantly, it would have seemed to me that the evening hours are probably when people are home together, though we've been home because of COVID, that's probably when things escalate from that perspective. Are we looking at the data and seeing what hours are an increase in the need?
Yeah, and that's a great question because we did track that, and we found that really The calls actually go up a little bit later in the day. Our corresponder team right now is scheduled for a certain time because of just coverage until we can hire another social worker. But we certainly are looking at that, and that's why, as I said in the presentation, that their hours are currently 10 to 6, but it's subject to change, and that is certainly one of those things that we're going to look at, is when they're most needed, so we can shift their schedule.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Great job.
Yep.
And Edie, thank you.
Items D, E, and F were approved as tonight's consent agenda, and that completes my report.
Yeah, seeing the flurries today, I was reminded of E, the rock salt purchase.
Very important.
My heart went a-flutter. Next item on the agenda is report of our Corporation Counsel, Michael Lorch.
Thank you, Mayor, trustees. Good evening, everyone. I'm looking at items A, B, and C on my agenda, which were ordinances that were covered in the consent agenda at the beginning of the evening and were adopted at that time. Item D is an ordinance which is on my report for first reading tonight. However, the petitioner has requested a change in the dedication and is preparing a new plat for this item. Therefore, I am not requesting board action on this item tonight. We will defer it. Item E is an ordinance which is on my report for first reading tonight and will be on the December 6, 2021 agenda for second reading and adoption at that time. This ordinance will amend Skokie Village Code by adding Chapter 2, Article 7, Division 16, Sections 2-861 through 2-864, and thereby create the Skokie Police Use of Force Review Board. The Skokie Police Department continues its work to establish and maintain the highest level of community policing work through professional accreditation processes, which the Skokie Police Department first attained in 1988. As an extension of the Skokie Police Department's ongoing work to prepare its officers to the highest standards, its command staff created an internal mandate that all personnel participate in training on non-discriminatory policy practices and appropriate use of force. As with any situation or any institution, review and transparency are critical in maintaining a high level of proficiency and professionalism. The mayor, in consultation with the Skokie elected officials of the previous village board, tasked the Skokie Public Safety Commission to undertake an in-depth study to assess the status of the Skokie Police Department's policies and practices concerning use of force. The Skokie Public Safety Commission undertook a 6-month extensive evaluation and assessment of the Skokie Police Department policies and practices as applicable to this subject. As part of the assessment, the Commission met with community organizations and groups which helped formulate its recommendations. The Commission's deliberation also concluded that most of the tenets of national standards and guidelines are already part of the Skokie Police Department policies and practices. Based on the recommendation of the Skokie Public Safety Commission and in consultation with the Skokie Village Manager, Corporation Counsel, and the Skokie Police Chief, the mayor has directed that a new village commission be established known as the Skokie Police Use of Force Review Board, and that its purpose and responsibility is to establish a process for community input regarding police policy and practices regarding use of force. The makeup and representation of the new board and its meetings are delineated in this new ordinance. It is another step in the village's commitment to reject all forms of discrimination and to assure that all people are treated with dignity and respect. This ordinance will come back to the board for action on December 6, 2021, unless there are specific questions.
Yes, trustee
Just one
Johnson.
question. In the ordinance, it says that this board will meet at least twice a year, but am I correct that they will be able to meet more often if they so choose?
Correct. We were trying to indicate, based on the request of the commission in its report to us, that they would want to meet twice a year, but we didn't want it to appear that that was limited. If there was some reason that there was a need for an additional meeting, the chair could certainly call another meeting.
They can meet as many times as they want. John, we'll just have him call John, and John will provide the space, right, John?
That's right.
If there are no other questions, Mayor, that would conclude my report for this evening.
Next item on the agenda is report of our Plan Commission. Two related Plan Commission cases this evening. Chairman Paul Luke with Matt Brandmeier.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the board. I do have two cases tonight that are related. Case 2021-26P is a zoning map amendment to the zoning ordinance, and 2021-27P is a site approval plan. In 2021-26P, the Plan Commission at its October 21st meeting heard the petitioner's request for a zoning map amendment to change the zoning district for 4,000 Church Street from a TX, which is a transit mixed-use district, to an NX, neighborhood mixed-use. The petitioner is rezoning the subject site to construct a dental office on site, which is located at the northwest corner of Church and Crawford. The applicant is requesting a zoning map amendment in order to allow a single-story commercial building, which is permitted in the NX district, but not permitted in the TX district. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And if I may, I will just go ahead and go into the site plan approval request. This is case 2021-27P at 4,000 Church Street. At the October 21st meeting, the Plan Commission heard a request for site plan approval to construct a single-story, 5,490 square foot dental office at 4,000 Church Street. The property is currently vacant and has been since an aging commercial building was removed in 2018 in anticipation of a previously approved development. The case involves approval of one item for relief to allow curb to be closer than 6 feet from the street frontage, excuse me. Legal notice was advertised, posted, and delivered to property owners in the area as prescribed by the zoning chapter. At the October 13th meeting of the Appearance Commission, they approved the facade and landscaping plan. In both cases, the Plan Commission voted 8 ayes, no nays, with one commissioner absent, that the petitioner's request be granted in both cases.
The first will be Plan Commission Case 2021-26P, zoning map amendment for 4,000 Church Street. Motion is in order. Trustee Johnson, seconded by Trustee Klein. Are there any comments or any questions? If not, call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
Trustee Robinson,
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn,
Aye.
Trustee Johnson,
Aye.
Trustee Pure Slovin,
Aye.
Trustee Klein,
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes. The second item is Plan Commission Case 2021-27P, site plan approval, 4,000 Church Street. Motion is in order. Trustee Robinson, seconded by trustee Johnson. Any comments or questions? If not, call the roll.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
trustee Robinson,
Aye.
trustee Kuhn,
Aye.
trustee Johnson,
Aye.
trustee Pure Slovin,
Aye.
trustee Klein,
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes. I wanted to be known, I did on my own see trustee Robinson. Thank you.
Very
I'm
good.
still trying to get
Yeah.
used.
This concludes my report, and I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, too. Thank you. The final item this evening is public comment. Is there anybody who wishes to address the village board? If you would come to the microphone and give us your name, please.
I feel like I can't breathe with this on, but I will do it. Thank you for this opportunity, Mayor Van Dusen and Mr. Lorch and trustees. I'm Mary Lee Lally, a Skokie resident. I live on Woods Drive. My husband and I live on Woods Drive. I'm taking this opportunity because I can't be here this Thursday, and I wanted to say something if I had a chance. Just to tell you that myself, my neighbors, my friends in Skokie, we can't begin to understand why Carvana would even be considered in this area. It seems so inappropriate for Skokie and for the area you're considering, the Planning Commission is considering especially. We have a daycare on the same street adjacent to where the Carvana would go, with infants and toddlers, many infants and toddlers. We have a forest preserve that stretches to Harm's Woods and beyond. I can't believe that the animals, the foliage will not be harmed by this, by the noise, the lights, the air quality, all of it. We have the Holocaust Museum. I mean, to me, it seems offensive, really. I consider that a sacred space. And to have something so garish overlooking it is offensive, I think. And then, of course, you have my neighbors at Optima. We have 2,000 people, more or less. Many families, many children, many small children. This will be a safety hazard. You know, much less the light, the noise, 9 car transports possible. It's just hard to even begin to understand. We're asking you to please consider this carefully. It's not something that is right for this area at all. As I understand it, the entire area could be changed, not just Woods Drive. I mean, this is an area sort of unique in Skokie, and we all cherish it. You know, it's not Dempster. Dempster is great, but this is not a commercial area as that is. So please, we are going to keep on fighting against this. So we're not going away. So please understand. Thank you.
Nick, as you note, the Planning Commission will be taking the subject up. So it's not, the village board is not doing anything on that subject this evening.
Oh, I do know.
Yes, okay. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Jared Brozak. I live in Optima also, and I just want to touch another subject, is that the zoning was OR, which describes, I mean, in the zoning description, it describes OR including a park-like setting, office, research, dense residential structures like Optima, but a Carvana Tower eyesore would, to sell cars would be totally out of character with the present zoning. The thing I want to emphasize is that zoning is a public trust. When people spend a large portion of their life savings to buy a home, they rely on the zoning that was present at the time. I understand zoning may change if it becomes obsolete and the character of the neighborhood changes, but just to change the zoning willy-nilly because something better comes along is actually a betrayal of trust of the people who spent a large portion of their life savings to buy a home based on the present zoning. And just to change it, to provide a windfall for the owners of a vacant property is a betrayal of trust. I mean, there's nothing that could be more trusting with public officials than to your residential situation where you have your home, and just to change the whole character from research and a park-like setting, that's how it's described, OR, to change it to basically an eyesore tower, which is a glorified billboard, would be a total betrayal of trust. And we're kind of giving a heads up now that I know it's not on the agenda today, but a heads up just to keep.
Jerry, we're aware.
Okay, thank you.
We are.
But it's a betrayal of trust.
Jerry,
Yes.
we understand. We catch it. It's on the Plan Commission agenda. It's not for this evening. We got your letter. We got Ms. Lawley's letter. We understand your position.
Thank you.
But it's not up tonight. I mean, you're welcome. We're glad to have you, but, yes, sir.
My name is Roberto Levi. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, and it's also regarding the Carvana project. I want to ask if anybody did any study about the effect of blue light in the health of the population. Do you have any study done?
I do not. That's
Does
why.
anybody in here?
Hold on. Let me finish. The village board will be relying on the staff and the Plan Commission to have you should be addressing that to the Plan Commission, not to the village board this evening. We're not taking up Carvana this evening.
I understand, but we have an open forum.
Of course.
And I want to express my,
I understand. You asked a question.
yes, okay, if you
And the
cannot
answer
answer,
is-
I
The
understand.
answer is we don't have that information yet.
Okay, then I'm going to give you some information.
Good.
Blue light is the worst of all the lights that can be used in order to illuminate that area. Blue light is harmful to humans, animals, and plants, affect the health of the individuals because alters, especially at night, starting at 6 p.m., a change on the circadian rhythm. And that may produce psychological problems, health problems in all the tissues, heart, and in between others, high blood pressure, and many other problems. The project apparently, they want to keep this up to 11 p.m., and even I heard 9 p.m. This is the same light that they use TV screens, for example, or cellular phones. The difference is that if I want to use my home TV or my cellular phone at night, that is my choice. But if you impose on me and all our neighbors blue light, that means you are trying to harm us. That's one thing. The second thing, and also is a question, if there is any study done, how many accidents are going to be in I-94 because of those signs? Is there any study done about that?
I don't know. There is a,
Well, I think it should be done.
may I finish?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. There is a Carvana in Oak Brook, I believe, which is just off the expressway. I'm not aware of any complaints about accidents being caused on the expressway by the village of Oak Brook. I don't know, maybe you or Matt have heard
But
something.
there are published studies about signs in the roads that produce accident because of distraction of the drivers. In other words, if there is any accident, it will be, and all of you, the responsibility.
Understood.
That's
Do
what I
you-
want to
Are
bring
you-
tonight, and we will be more than glad to bring information, publications,
I was just going
and
to,
papers that there are tons of them written about the
Doctor,
damage of that
Doctor.
light. I'm sorry?
do you have studies on blue light?
Yes, there are.
Okay,
You can even look in Google, and you will find it.
okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you.
Dr. Levy, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm John Lally, and I also live in Optima, and I know everyone wants to go home, and I know we should limit this to under 3 minutes, so I promise I'll be real quick, and if I go beyond, tell me to go and sit down. But one point I want to make about this is Caravan is coming in, and they will be advertising 4 ways on their design on all the sides of the building. Michael Lorsch and I had some dealings a long time ago because Optima put up a sign on their building. And then they went in, and we were kind of at odds for a while, and Optima pulled a permit for a second sign. And Michael took about one date to tell him, you can't do that, one sign on a building. And please remember that when Caravan comes in here. If Optima is limited to one sign, shouldn't Caravan be as well?
Thank you. Doctor, if you know of studies and you want, forward them to me. I'll give you my card afterwards. Thank you. I didn't want you to think, we want to be as informed as we possibly can, so, thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the village board? If not, Trustee Sucker,
I move we adjourn.
we are adjourned.